Hey, this is Spiros from the Malloy team, and I want to share a preview with you of the latest work we're doing on the render and interactivity. So I have a Malloy model here called order items. And if I look at the schema for that model, I can see that this semantic model has a bunch of already predefined views like top categories and a brand dashboard, as well as dimensions in the semantic model and measures that we can use. And it's joined with other tables with their dimensions and measures already modeled. So we can use all of these things to start building queries on our own. Now, before I jump into the latest changes in the interactivity that we're adding to Malloy, first let's review just how do you make basic charts in Malloy. So a basic query in Malloy looks something like this. You take your order items model, and you can group by a dimension and aggregate by a measure and pick top 10. And when you run that, you get a simple table output like this. If you want to turn that output into a chart, you can add a tag and tag the chart type you want. And the fields in the query will be implicitly mapped to the right chart properties. So in this case, I take that same query and I tag it as bar chart, and I get a simple bar chart out. Now I can add another field to break that out further, and also add more tags to further control the output. So we'll take that bar chart and add a size equals large to it to make a slightly bigger chart. And we'll add a second dimension of gender against our product category and sales. When I do that, now I have a bar chart by product category, broken out by gender, and the total sales plotted on there. And if I want to make that a stack, I could add a stack tag as well. So I can further configure the chart in different ways like that. Now, maybe I don't want to use the implicit field mappings. Instead, I want to manually tag which property should be which. Like maybe I wanted product category to be assigned to the series, which would be that legend. And actually gender is the field that goes on the x-axis. So by doing that, I end up flipping this chart and getting this much maybe noisier and less useful chart. But that's how you can get better control over the visualization. Now, what you saw here is we've done a group by and a stack chart where we're doing a dimension to break out the series, but you can do a series of measures as well. So I take that query from before and we do it by product category. This time I'm going to add two measures. One is total sales and one is total gross margin. And I'm going to explicitly add both of them to the y-axis. When I do that, that gives me a grouped chart where each bar in the grouping is one of the two measures plotted against each other. And this would work with stack as well. If you wanted to stack these things, you could add the stack tag and get a similar result. Now, for formatting, you can format the numbers in these axes and in the tooltips you're going to see later using simple tags like %, which will do a percentage for you, currency, which will automatically do a currency for you. And then if you want a more bespoke format, you can use the number tag, and you can use any kind of spreadsheet syntax you might have used in Excel or in Google Sheets. That'll work here for styling your numbers. So here's an example where we're going to add the metric as % of sales, and that's going to be total sales divided by all total sales for our product categories. And when we do %, here, we'll do that, and you'll see that the axis is now formatted as a % to match the data the way we tagged it. One other interesting thing we did here is we added an aggregate that's not in the actual bar chart. We added average gross margin. And the reason we did that is that then we can order by that thing. So we can order by metrics or configure the chart by metrics that aren't actually used to render the bar chart itself. So in this case, we have the % of sales for all of our products, but they're sorted by the highest margin to the lowest margin. So Suits is our highest margin product, but it's only 5% of our sales. Now we'll start looking at nesting charts and interactivity. So charts can be nested in tables, and when you do that, you can share or have independent axes. So I'm going to take order items model, and I'm going to group it by state. And for each state, I want to see a calculation of total sales. But then nested within each state, I want to see the state's top categories. So this is a predefined view in the model now. Before we were writing views out by hand, but now we're going to use some of the predefined views that came with the semantic model. And we'll do top 10 states, and we'll tag that top categories view as a bar chart. When we run this, we get this rich output where we have California total sales, and then a breakout of the product categories and their sales in California, and in Texas, and in New York, and in Illinois, etc. And you'll see as I scroll down here that these charts all share the same y-axis values so that you can compare them up and down the chart. But if you didn't want that, if you wanted them all to be independent, so you could just get a better look at specifically Ohio or other states, you can just add a tag of y.independent to say the y-axis should be independent, not shared. And now every chart has its own y-axis scaling. And so you get a more focused view for each row, but not a comparative view. Now, interactions in these charts are all applied to the same dimensions and measures across the output based on where they came from in the semantic model. These interactions, what you're going to see, include highlighting X and Y values, brushing axes, highlighting series and legends, and tooltips. So let's start by looking at a simple output of, we'll go back to our chart where we have group by state, total sales, and just one top categories chart. And we're going to do it in a smaller size so we can see more of them. So I mentioned you can highlight X and Y values here. So as I take one chart and highlight over an X, you can see that it highlights the same X value in any other chart that has that same dimension and same value. And I can see the tooltip with the value for that. You can see when I hover an element in the chart specifically, like the bar, it gives me a reference line for what is that actual value. And that reference line shows not only in this chart, but in all the charts below. So I can easily compare, how is accessories in California doing versus accessories in New York versus any other bar in that list. So easy highlighting on the X-axis. You also have easy highlighting on the Y-axis. So if you hover the Y-axis, the legend clears off, or excuse me, the axis clears off, and now you can go and scan and create your own reference lines. Now these reference lines, you can see have nice steps to them. So they're kind of coarse. They go in this case, increments of looks like maybe 40 or 50, depending on the size of your axis. But if you want more fine-grained control, you can hold the shift key, and now you can go all the way to the lowest level and pick individual numbers and try to dial in something more specific. Now we can do, that was highlighting, but we can do brushing as well. So let's see, I just want to look at like the top 3 categories in California. When I highlight that brush, it highlights the same data in all the other charts. I can do that over here, create different groupings like that. And I can do the same thing on the Y-axis. I could say, let me just select this range of values and get those highlights. So maybe I want to see everything that's above 97,000, and I pull that up. And I can see in the other charts below what matches that criteria. So Texas and New York has some, Illinois has 0, so on and so forth. And you can even mix and match these things. So I could say, I want to look at these top 3 products in the X-axis, but I want to see only the values that fall in this range. And I can see kind of which charts have those and which don't. So we can see in California it doesn't fit that range. In Texas, all 3 fit the range. In New York, only jeans fit the range. So you can really do some powerful things using these controls. Now, these interactions are shared not only down a single column, but across all columns in our output, depending on how they're linked up on the semantic model. So if I run this query here, where I have order items, group by state, and then total sales as the aggregate, just like we already had, and then a nested chart of top categories. If I had a second chart of top categories by a different measure and run that, now I get this output. And when I hover an X on one chart, not only is the top categories highlighted, but that same entity, if it's found in the other charts on the other columns, will be highlighted. So I can go to something like jeans, which is our top product by sales, and see where does it land in terms of top margin. It's actually not even in the top 10 for margin. So jeans is not a high margin product for us, but we're selling a lot of it. If we look at accessories, accessories tends to be our second most sold product, and it's our highest margin, and so on and so forth. And these interactions work the same way as before, where if I kind of brush some items here, I can see where do those items land in the other charts as well. So you can do some more complex analysis to compare different measures to each other across different charts just by doing things like this. And now because these are different metrics, the reference lines won't be shared. They'll only share across the same Y measure. Now I mentioned before we can also highlight series charts. So here's another query where we're going to take order items, grouping by state, getting the total sales. And this time we're going to have a top categories view by gender. So this is going to be a series chart. And we're also going to have a top categories demographic trend. And if we look at what those outputs look like, we have a bar chart with top category total sales by gender. And we have, I see these are misnamed, so excuse me for the misnamings. This should be top sales by gender, and this should be top sales demographic trend. You have order year here, and what you can do is if I hover like the male value, not only does it highlight in the existing series charts, but any other chart that's using that value, like our bar chart to the left, is also highlighted. And same for looking at the female values, and you can of course hover in here and have the same type of effect, or hover over here and have the same effect. So anywhere in the semantic model where those dimensions match and those values match, we do brushing and highlighting to make the comparisons easy. So this kind of thing works especially well when you're using like trend charts, mini charts, deeply nested content. So here's a more complex query where I group by state, I get the total sales, I take a bar chart for trailing 18-month trend. So what's the trend of sales over the last 18 months? Then I nest a query I'm going to call top 5 cities, where I'm going to group by every city. I'm going to get the total sales for that city. And then within that city, I'm going to actually nest the exact same chart, the same view of trailing month trend. So I'm going to reuse the same view coming from the semantic model. And in this example, I'm going to make it much smaller. I'm going to make it a spark line rather than a big chart. And if I run this query, you'll see this very rich output. I get the state of California. I get California's total sales. I get the trend, monthly trend for the last 18 months for California. And then within California, I get the top 5 cities and their sales. And I get the same kind of trend for each city in a spark line. And so this is where that model becomes really useful, being able to scan some value in the total chart and see the same value highlighted on the mini charts to the right. I could highlight specific ranges. And what's cool about this is when I highlight specific ranges like that, let's do it again. Not only if you look to the right, not only do I see where that matches in the mini charts, but I can actually see what months we didn't have sales. Like if you go down and look at New York on the 3rd row and then Yonkers, you'll see there's a white gap there. That's because there was no data for that month. So not only am I seeing where's their data and where's the line, but I'm also getting a look at where's the missing data, where were there no sales to be reported. And so this all works the same way as before. Now these interactions work across any type of Malloy output. For example, we've been looking at tables, like here's an example of what we've been looking at where everything renders into a table, but maybe this is overwhelming to look at a table and you want something a little more user-friendly and consumable. Well, I can use a different layout Malloy offers, like the dashboard layout. When I do that, I get a dashboard where each measure at the top level was a KPI, and then we get the charts embedded this way, and I can scroll through the different states, and the interactions still work the exact same way. I can hover and highlight stuff, I can pick areas, I can do all those kind of operations before, and it works across these nested dashboards. The last thing I want to talk about is tooltip customization. So tooltips can be customized in a few ways. The first is by tagging additional aggregates. So like out of the box, you can see when I hover a value, I just get a tooltip generated from like what the data being rendered in the bar chart is. But in this case here, I'm going to take a query, I'm going to group it by state and have total sales. I'm going to make a bar chart called yearly sales trend, where I look at for every state here, the trend over year of total sales. But I want to add a tooltip that has additional metrics to it. I want to see percent of sales, I want to see gross margin percent, and I want to see average gross margin when I hover a specific year. So I can add all those aggregates to this Malloy query and just tag it as hash tooltip. When I do that, it's going to add those metrics to the tooltip. So when I look at 2019 here, I get total sales, percent of sales, and gross margin percent, so on and so forth across these different charts. And they're formatted according to whatever format came with that measure. So you can see I've got percentage formats on percent of sales and gross margin percent. Now, the powerful thing about Malloy is its ability to nest data within the semantic model. So we can actually use nested data in our tooltips as well in order to render tables or lists or even charts in the tooltips. So here's a model where I have order items. Again, gonna group by state, aggregate by total sales. We're gonna make a year's sales trend chart. And that's gonna be group by order year, aggregated total sales. But this time we're going to add a nest of a monthly sales trend. And we're gonna add that to the tooltip and draw it as a bar chart. And then we're going to have a nest of the top 3 categories. We're gonna add it to the tooltip and we're gonna render it using Malloy's list detail render. So when I run this query, now I get a chart where for California, I get total sales and every sales broken up by year. And if I hover a specific year, I get also the monthly trend for that specific year and what the top 3 categories were during that year. And so I can quickly scan across this and see what the different month trends were across these different charts. So this is a preview of some new features coming to the Malloy render, interactivity, and custom tooltips. Love to get your feedback once it goes live.